All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome and thank you for making it out. We're going to keep today's AI talk centered in the real. First off, some obligatory disclaimers. This is coming from us at SPEC, not from RSA. But getting straight into the realness of the attack, we're going to talk about a real attack that made one of the customers that we work with exposed to a $9 million loss. This is powered by AI agents, and I want to really get deep into what this is and how this works. Now, specifically, we're talking about an attack against marketplaces. Now, in a marketplace attack, if you're not familiar, effectively in this instance, the attacker's using AI agents to transform stolen credit cards and dirty money into clean cash by manipulating the user experience and abusing it for personal gain. Now, a bit about how we know about this. My name is Nate Carl. I'm the CEO of SPEC. We use effectively NSA-style dragnet data collection to protect websites and public APIs from fraud and abuse. That means that we take wild internet traffic, process that down into real user events that make up real user journeys. This includes the network events, like the requests that are happening, as well as the application events, the pages that are visited, searches that are performed, the interactions with the actual application itself, as well as the business events like authentications, payments, and transfer reversals. This is the reason why we're able to see all of this data and why we are able to catch these style of attacks and why we're able to share this information with you. So getting into what we're talking about specifically with these AI attacks, this is probably a little bit different than what you've been hearing. There's been a lot of AI attacks being talked about here at RSA. We are not talking about script runners or pen testing tools that use some sort of machine learning loop. What we are talking about are AI agents. So they impersonate real users. They use real clicks, keystrokes, and swipes, and they effectively work like a virtual attack team that lets really small groups scale up into very large and sophisticated attacks. So what this means is instead of what would normally be out of reach for a sole attacker or a very small attack group, they're effectively able to replicate the labor of a few dozen sophisticated attackers basically trained on what you've put on Stack Overflow over the last 20 years in order to figure out how to patiently reverse engineer your policies and risk models in order to abuse directly through the user experience, stealing millions while looking like a real customer. So the thing that is incredible about these is that they are so simple to use that they're largely being marketed to teenagers and 20-somethings. Usually sneaker bots are a great way to get them through the door. And then as soon as those are revealed to be a little bit unprofitable, the communities that support these tools then bring them into more sophisticated schemes, including money laundering, and fraudulent payment methods being used to extract data. So let's go deep into these tools themselves. I'm very pleased to introduce Julie Yang, who's the VP of Product at SPEC.
Hello, I will be taking you through a brief overview of the industrial revolution of bots, as I like to call it, and then walk through an example of one of the more popular attack tools out on the market today. So, about a decade ago, a major retailer came under intense bot attack pressure. We were told not to say the major retailer's name, but we were also at the same time told it was okay to name the technology. So Better Nike Bot was created in response to the drop of a very coveted product launch. I think most of us know about Air Jordans. Nike was promoting these heavily ahead of the drop with campaigns that used repetitive keywords. So tech-savvy customers took those keywords, created automated responses, and then were able to get a leg up on getting the inventory. And thus was born what some people think of as a cottage industry of sneaker bots. But really, these are more like real businesses because they employ real employees who get real benefits. And it makes sense if you think about it, almost like an unregulated financial security. These sneakers, these assets, carry a lot of value. They are relatively easy and quick to buy and sell. They are fungible for cash, and they appreciate. They can be sold at multiples of what they were bought for. And if you don't get sneakers, then think of a well-respected company like NVIDIA. If they were to drop a limited amount of stock every week at a discounted price, what incentive there is to put in a ton of effort to make sure you are at the front of the line each week to get it, and then turn around to make a pile of cash. And that is why it makes sense that this is a business, and that in the 10 years since this has started, hundreds of tech companies have died. But Better Nike Bot, good news, is still around. And they are also hiring C# developers, if you know someone who's looking. But anyway, from there, you get a lucrative market. And once a lucrative market is established in Russia's competition, and therefore the need to diversify revenue streams. And that's what you see. On the digital side, you see specialization evolving into tickets. We all know and have heard of the Live Nation disaster with Taylor Swift's Eras Tour. Not so with a couple other artists like Nicki Minaj, unfortunately. But anyway, on the physical side, you have the same kind of demand for high ticket items like new technology, limited edition collectibles, and fashion items. And then from there, you actually see that two-sided marketplaces, buyer-seller marketplaces, have the same problems that other retailers do. They have inventory stockouts. But they also come with their own nuances. Of course, you have the buyer-seller collusion that happens so that they can bid up the sell price and inflate the earnings of the attackers, thereby creating a terrible experience for everyone else. And of course, with marketplaces, you also get bidirectional money transfer. So really, it just makes sense. It's only a hop, skip, and a jump that these tools start targeting money movement transfers directly. Fintechs, financial institutions, are coming under attack. Now, to be fair, we all know that these institutions have been under attack for years and years and years. It is simply the scale and the speed at which an effective launch can be an effective attack can be launched today. It is just different. I also want to note that, as Nate mentioned, in this evolution over time in the last 10 years, it has not simply been specialization of industries. It has been the change from command line interfaces with automated scripts that tell bots what to do with what intervals and where to go, to now task-driven AI agents that are given outcomes to achieve by acting like humans, collaborating with each other, and it is just simply different. I also wanted to note that during this time, you also see a rise in this activity, not just because these tools are so accessible, both to the professional or to the casual teenage hacker, your children, but also because the macro trends that are available. Of course, you have a shift from physical to digital. It is easier from a process perspective and also from a psychological perspective to commit this kind of behavior. You have an economic downturn that people turn to alternative activity in order to supplement or replace their income. And you just have an explosion of these kinds of tools. All right, so now we will walk through one of the retail-specific distributions of what they call AIOs, or all-in-ones. This is meant to be all you need to hit that sweet, sweet jackpot. Now, from a personal note, I, as a product person, feel compelled to mention that every single time I see one of this generation of tools, I always think, dang, that is so pretty. Did they contract an Apple designer to create this? And the reason why I think this is because using these tools, the UI, UX, user interface, and the user experience, as Nate mentioned, is so intuitive that it is easy to learn. But it also incentivizes usage, because you can just log on and, like that, launch an attack. So here you have the dashboard of one of the retail-specific ones. As noted in the previous slide, distribution. This distribution also comes for fintechs and marketplaces, but this is the retail-specific one, as you can see in these workflows. What you have here is a dashboard to look at your agents. So which agents have succeeded and which ones are on their way to succeeding, starting with getting a session. And then here, let me see if I can see that. So getting a session at the top, and then here, the second one is monitoring. And you can actually see that they divide and conquer in terms of what these agents are supposed to do. You have a monitor or a watcher who looks for inventory, price drops, glitches in the system, whatever it is. They are watching the websites to see if they have the inventory they want. And then you have other agents who are adding to cart, removing from cart, browsing, acting like a human. And this is the collaboration aspect. Once the monitors or the watchers see that prized item, instantly they can tell the other agents, go check out. And that's what they do. And that is essentially your funnel for your agents. And what you will see is real browsers, real clicks, because they want to look like humans. So these apps come with native support for specific browsers. And these attackers want to set up their agents for success, create the environment for the least amount of friction when it comes to checkout. So what they do is they go ahead and set up the environment for their agents, whether that's harvesting cookies, setting up residential proxies that are near the shipping address, or associating real identity profiles to avoid redirects to payment service providers or step-up challenges during the checkout process. They really have thought this through, how to keep the sessions alive, and when it comes down to the main point, checkout, they do not get flagged as bots or AI agents. They do not get flagged for manual review. They simply succeed. And of course, these have been around for a few years now. So they do actually come with specific support for certain big box retailers, for better or worse, and also niche retailers, some of them. It's actually quite a large and impressive list. And these tools also come with chat support and live phone support. So they really are a SaaS company. And of course, when it comes time to check out, these agents can run any number of tasks with synthetic or stolen identity and payment data. And I do want to note here that these agents are incredibly disciplined, unlike, well, I'm disciplined, but in general, humans. Or I like to think I'm disciplined. But the point that I try to make is they do not forget to set the proxy. They do not input the wrong data. They do not tire. It is not about the success of any individual agent. It is about learning your systems so that they can increase the overall chances of success as a whole. And that is exactly how AI agents dodge detection. Once they set up the tasks, are properly resourced against them, they run simultaneously against your systems to get that real-time feedback and then adjust and try again. So what does this look like on a system then? On the receiving end, what does this traffic look like? It looks like a little bit of everything, like we just said. This is a real example from one of our fintech customers of agents on the system. And it was very clear automated threshold testing. And we could tell that this was a fraud ring on the system because, amongst other things, they had committed bad behavior like credential stuffing. And so what we did was we pulled the activity associated with this fraud ring and looked at it. And this is a visualization of those agents in red and the events along a customer journey in blue. And what we saw was interesting. So we saw on the one hand, I don't know what to call them, peeping Toms. All they wanted to do was log in. They felt great, got a 200 success, called it a day. That's all they did. They just logged in. That's it. Sorry, these are compromised accounts. They committed the credential stuffing, were successful to some extent, and then these are what they did with the compromised accounts. So they're logging in to compromised accounts. And then some went on to view the home dashboard. Some clicked into view account details. A few clicked into update phone on the personal account. That part actually surprised me. I would have expected this to happen more given MFA challenges and whatnot before the final two steps, but the final two steps were the juicy parts. They added payees, new payees, AKA themselves, and then attempted express transfers just before close of business on a Friday when the manual review teams had likely gone home. And that's why these AI agents are so powerful, because they are everywhere, feeling for the cracks of your online systems with a seeming knowledge of your online processes that will let them get through. I am not an emotional person, but when I saw this, I swung wildly between two emotions, amused and terrified. Amused because if all my money's gone, I can't even buy a beer to cry into. Terrified because, OMFG, this is what they're doing? There are still moles in the system. So then the question becomes, what do you do? I mean, obviously you shut down the 6-digit illegal wire transfers of money, but what about the peeping Toms? What about the people who didn't do anything? What we see in our customers is actually a range of responses depending on the risk tolerance and what's at stake. So some of them say, shut it down, now. Ain't nobody got time for that, again. But some of our customers actually say, I want to know more. I want to know, can they lead me to other bad actors that I have yet to identify? Can they lead me to new exploits in the system? I mean, obviously we will flag them so that nothing truly untoward can happen, but let them stay and see what happens. Can they give up some information? And can my AI agents become AI double agents? And on that note, I will hand it back to Nate.
So let's go a little bit deeper into the specifics around a pretty large-scale attack that we talked about earlier, this marketplace. So it starts with something that seems really, really just innocent. Some reactivated marketplace sellers. And so in the business, sometimes as a marketplace, someone who has the ability to list products and then extract money out of the marketplace itself, people go away for some reason and then sometimes come back. Now, in the case of these reactivated marketplace sellers, they knew the right password to log in. They passed the sniff test on their device, their location, like all of their core, basically, biometrics. And for the places where they were challenged, they were able to pass those challenges in one go and prove that they had access to the email address. Like no risk manager in their right mind would be able to go to the business with any shred of proof to say that we should lock them out of this account. Right? The same deal on the buyer side. For the buyers who are initiating these transactions, there was nothing popped on any of their risk tools. The cards look clean, like all the payment methods matched the name of the buyer itself, and there was no risk associated with device, location, email, anything along that line. Again, no risk manager in their right mind would be able to look at the fraud data and say, we shouldn't let these people do this. And if you zoom out and you look at the entire network of all of the interactions that are happening in this, again, nothing shows up. There is no network. There is no behavioral pattern. These look like individual users who are just interacting the way the marketplace is designed. They would never stop that, right? Nothing in the fraud data said anything besides squeaky clean, A-OK. Now, what we saw, like one layer up inside of the actual product data, was that the interactions that were non-transactional, so the interactions that were, hey, where are we seeing wish lists? Where are we seeing things being added to cart? Where are we seeing page views? Almost exclusively, we saw that there were these buyers who were acting really strangely, where they really only seemed to care about this reactivated seller population. And immediately a network starts to form. Like immediately, our first tip, they're like, oh, this seems like an absolute problem. And we pull even further out into what the security teams could see, and we could see what it was monitor activity, effectively scraping, where there are monitors who are, what they do is basically look at the site so that these AI agents can move through it a little bit more quickly. But they're exclusively looking relatively low and slow, like a request every few minutes or so, at the listings for these reactivated seller accounts. Now, independently, this information would not be very interesting to a security team. Right? It's very, very quiet, low amounts, barely even scraping. And that's kind of the core of the problem. That's the reason why these attacks perform so well, is because there's not enough in the fraud data to really call out what this problem is. It's not interesting to the security team because it's not really aggressive scraping. No one's going to get nuts about it. It's a handful of GET requests every few minets. And the product team, it just gets lost in the wash. Right? It's not until you bring these together that you start to understand the real pattern between these data sets that lets you expose specifically this type of activity. Now, once you're able to identify it, you will have a very bad time if you start blocking it. Every 403 that you serve, every account that you lock turns into training data for these tools. It's very, I understand, technically and organizationally difficult to pull off, but a honeypot UX is crucial to turn the retooling time into something that happens from hours to days into something that takes months or longer, right? Like you can get real lasting benefits from that and also harvest an enormous amount of information out of these attackers through this method. Now, takeaways, things that you can do right now, like literally go home right now on this. It's really about bringing this data together. The big thing is being able to speak a common language across these three teams. Right, talking out loud, your fraud teams are really thinking about the type of data they collect and the events they care about. They care about payments, they care about returns, they care about exceptions in the transfer process. They have no concept of what a request is, right? They don't know what an endpoint is. You can't speak that language with them, right? You need to find something that really gels there. Same thing with your product teams. Your product teams are really focused on users and conversion events, right? Again, they're not going to operate at the level of a security team. And as a security team, you're probably the only person who really understands what a URI is in this entire group. So, in order for you to bring all that together, one of the easiest ways you could start is make this start happen in the data. And the biggest thing is being able to pull session IDs, like this concept, right? It's a very granular concept about a user visit, and then making sure that that's present in all the data that the three teams work with. It gives them a little bit of lingua franca to start talking to each other and start to find trends between the data that these three teams have. And the second thing really, and this is something you can start immediately, is start to ask questions before people put enforcement mechanisms into place. We have found time and time again that when enforcement methods are too abrupt, they're too immediate, it is just way too clear of a signal for these tools. They find their way to dance around them incredibly quickly. So offline enforcement, if that's the best that you can get it, honeypots are ideal if you can do that. But making sure that you're not just giving immediate feedback to these tools does so much in order to put lasting protections into place. So I'll leave you with a couple questions to answer on this. Are these type of tools touching you right now? One of the best ways to figure out is to start looking at the different scraping activity that you're seeing. So if you're able to pull that off of your network logs, and then start to compare that with some of the confirmed fraud outcomes that your fraud team has, that if you can find linkages between that, that's usually a sure sign that you are effectively having your site monitored, and then that monitored information is being pushed to these attack tools. In terms of why bot detection tools don't find these are literally built to replicate human behavior. It's not automated in the way that bot tools consider them these automated attacks. This will come up no bot for them over and over and over again. And then lastly, are these being used in a banking context? It's just starting. The roots of this really came out in the world of sneaker bots. They had to liquidate to marketplaces. We're seeing a ton in marketplaces at this point. Those marketplaces all settled to bank accounts. We're seeing this show up inside of fintechs more and more, especially when it comes to origination, if there's credit or loan products, and any sort of automated money muling. So with that said, thank you very much for attending. If there's any questions, we're happy to take any on the mics here. Otherwise, we'll hang around afterward to answer any that you might have.
Hi, I wonder what the honeypots look like. Do you craft those according to your client? And also, if you know, if there's a particular or similar actor behind those IP addresses that you're analyzing.
Totally, yeah. So for honeypots, what we find is like the least lift, the better. Oftentimes it just comes to having a bit of a misdirect. So in the cases of fintechs, one of the things that we like most commonly do is like we'll present a success when it's not actually a success on the instant payment, and then just get them to call in. Right, and so sometimes it is that little bit of a misdirect that can that help out with there. Like we will generally set up a trigger in the back end, so they'll do like a back end cleanup to make sure like, hey, we had an exception here, we wanted to check in with you. The other being, and this is more in the context of marketplaces, but shadow banning listings is amazing. So just being able to target specific IPs that are coming in, it's like, oh, if you create a listing, it will show up and look real in the market, even if you visit anonymously. But there is actually nothing on the marketplace for the buyer to interact with, and like that creates safety for them.
Is this on? Okay. Also, to extend what Nate just said, I think one of the more common ones that we also see is credential stuffing. Happens to everyone, certainly. So what we see is a mix of bot-human behavior. Once the bots succeed, that's when the humans come online and browse and do their little peeping Tom thing. So with honeypotting, one of the ways to help with that is to mask the success responses. So once they're known to be credential stuffing, whether that's low or slow, whatever rules you have to actually mark it as a credential stuffing attack, after that, marking those or masking those successes, what we've seen is that that's pretty successful in stopping the humans from coming in because they just don't know. They basically are just slamming thousands of requests, and they don't look at each thing to be like, this should have succeeded. It succeeded in 10 other sites where I tried to use the same combo. Why would it fail here?
I have actually a funny anecdotal thing. So there's some really fun hallucination that we've been able to cause in having attack tools who have breached data. They're trying to log into these accounts. They're like trying all sorts of different things, and they're pretty sure that they should be able to log in. They're pretty sure they have the right credential. They're not getting it, and literally in all of its like generative creativity, decides to start creating accounts. And it's like, hey, like I got into the homepage for this account. Like, are you using this email address? Excellent, like job well done, right? It's like kind of like successfully failed. So it's been really interesting to see just how like the honeypots have like created weird aberrant behaviors specifically in these attack tools.
Are you starting to see any like legitimate use of these tactics and tools from like people that are just trying to get stuff for themselves without a compromised account or stolen? Asking for a friend kind of question here, by the way. I'm just curious if there's been a rise in services to try to snipe coveted tickets or items by legitimate buyers as well.
It's gotten a lot more common and a lot easier. I will say that like I have friends from an older generation who are literally using tools like this legitimately in order to secure golf tee times, right? Just because they're like seeing so much reservation happen in this. So like it's becoming so easy at this point that it's a little bit problematic, and I think there's a bit of a shift in the Overton window in terms of like, is this really illegal or not? And like, I think that's probably going to be the biggest barrier between seeing this jump from marketplaces into financial services, because like financial services definitely feels like crime, whereas like abusing a marketplace.
Well, that was kind of my follow-on question to that is, how troublesome were your clients, finding the type of behavior and activity, and if they were not, differentiating between the two would seem like it would be trying to decipher shades of gray, and it's stopping one versus the other.
Totally, and this is like very specific to financial services and fintech. You have a lot of transaction volume that you really want to draw a line, right? You don't want to like shut off everything that like looks suspicious, even if sometimes you might err on the side of being too permissive. So it's a little bit of that appetite for risk in the organization, which is sometimes less black and white than like we love in like the security world.
Thanks for the presentation.
Yeah.
When I see this, I'm thinking, I can't go out and use those tools on the botnet to like effectively red team my own systems. Is this something out there that we can deploy into our own organization, or are there tools out there? And or is it better to just, how would you defend against these types of items?
Don't deploy these tools. And the reason we tell you not to deploy these tools is all of these tools backdoor everything you're doing and your results to the development teams. The development teams literally like find attacks that other people find, and they're like, well, no, we'll do these. And they like literally like snipe them out from underneath the people who discover them. So definitely don't deploy them yourselves. And sorry, what was the second part of your question?
And so, how do you defend against it?
The big thing in terms of like being able to defend against these type of attacks is like making sure that the data basically ties together. At the end of the day, this is a business policy, right? So it's a business policy, like if you find this type of linking, like should this type of interaction be allowed to occur? Which like will vary from every business, from business to business to be sure. One of the first questions that we talk to when we talk to like fintechs or financial services, or specifically around, is the directive more that we want to protect the customer or protect the bank, right? And it's a hard question to ask, but you've got to be like really honest, because you'll know what you're working with there, and you're going to draw that line a little bit differently depending on what that might be. If the answer is to protect the customer, the biggest thing on this is making sure that like account security becomes a thing that like you're doing jointly with a customer. What we found is that pushing the right type of notifications, like keeping the right type of friction in place, actually drives up usage, especially of like core banking products. Like if they know that like there's like, hey, we saw something, it seemed unusual. I'm not bothered by it. I'm just happy that like you're keeping me safe on this thing. And like, that's been the biggest bit. In terms of the specific detection around this, like bringing your fraud and security data together is going to be the best thing. It's very hard to do in real time, so what you'll tend to find is that like it might take you a few days to make those connections, and then the next step is like, all right, how do we solve these problems in real time?
Is there any opportunity to reverse engineer some of those AIO tools so that you could spot the signatures of those and then block the traffic?
Yeah, so like this is like some secret sauce for like us and some of what we do. Pushing poisoned responses back is an incredible way to get the attack tool to effectively kind of like warble a little bit. And the poison data is usually something that a real user can't detect, right? So like I kind of like liken it to like, hey, if you blow a dog whistle, like all the werewolves in the room are gonna wince, right? It's just like, it's a really handy way to figure out like where you actually have agents who are in your experience as opposed to real users. So happy to talk in more detail about that.
So you mentioned this is showing up in fintechs and financial institutions, maybe account opening, loan originations, and what maybe they've seen in the past, bot attacks. You can see the volume come through, enhanced authentication, things like CAPTCHA. So how are those entities identifying these attacks and then responding? Because typically there has to be some form of PII. You have to build a profile for the customer to open the account. So I'm wondering how they're identifying it. Yeah,
it's pretty interesting. I'm going to talk about like the last customer that we worked with here. They originally thought that they had a credit risk problem, right? They're like, we keep on writing these loans that walk away, right? And we really need to go look at our underwriting department and figure out what they're getting wrong. It wasn't until they got deeper that they realized that like, no, there's actually effectively persistent tooling that is pushing breach data in through these endpoints. The thing that was like really interesting, and I think one of the things that is the best way to kind of tip this, is sometimes they'll mix breach data that you know about with breach data that you don't. So being able to take these in real time, understanding, like doing some basic threat intelligence to see what's out there, and then seeing how you can start to link together different requests so that you can effectively find that. And that's been like the biggest way that they've been able to find them, is to find things that are kind of like inside of the like very clearly high risk, and then start to map the connections to everything else. It's really like building a big graph is the short answer to your question.
Thanks.
So I'm going to follow on with that with some good news and some bad news. I think the good news is that a lot of times there are human bot interactions, and because you're able to link the data, then you're able to essentially draw these rings and linkages so that you can then go from what is one piece of a puzzle to see a bigger picture, which is a great news because people do make mistakes, and that's exactly what we see, whether that's forgetting to turn off a VPN or turn on a VPN or other kinds of very obvious visible errors. And then the bad news is that at some point they do look like humans. So it depends on your resources and your business policies and whether you actually want to exactly shut down all this activity, because it's the 80-20 rule going down to the 99-1. How much time do you want to spend trying to shut down activity when it seems innocuous? And you can try to go do that, but the overlap is there because from what you see on the network traffic side isn't always going to be very clear that, oh, this is launched by an AI agent or a bot or a tool that is very sophisticated. So good news, bad news. There is a lot that you can do until you get to that point where it starts getting marginal diminishing returns, but there is a point where it just depends on how many resources you want to throw at trying to stop that.
All right, if there's nothing else, we'll let you all go. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.